Thank you again for joining our Policy Committee call today, and I'll be turning it over to Peter Kaplan.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Housing Alliance Policy Subcommittee call on homeownership. We're delighted that so many of you, over 70 people from cities, suburbs, and rural areas located all over the state, have joined us for this call. I am Peter Kaplan, Chair of the Policy Committee of the Housing Alliance, and as you can see from this agenda slide, this call will have one presentation by Michelle Feldman, the Policy Director of the Housing Alliance, followed by a question and answer period led by our guest expert, Doug Ryan of Prosperity Now. We look forward to your questions and insights. I'd like to take a moment to provide you with a little background on the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania and to introduce our two speakers. The Housing Alliance is a statewide coalition working to provide leadership and a common voice for policies, practices, and resources to ensure that all Pennsylvanians, especially those with low incomes, have access to safe, decent, and affordable homes. We promote common sense solutions to balance Pennsylvania's housing market and increase the supply of safe, decent homes for low-income people. We're a diverse coalition that includes nonprofit and for-profit housing developers, people with lived experience of housing issues, service providers, government, and funders. Next slide, please. We seek to be Pennsylvania's go-to resource for building knowledge and skills by providing research and information services, education, training, and technical assistance, and outreach. Next slide, please. The Policy Committee's role in this work is to produce information and policy recommendations that inform and shape the activities and policies of the Housing Alliance. We have 4 policy subcommittees reflecting 4 core issues: homeownership, blight, homelessness, and affordable rental housing. In addition to the homeownership subcommittee meeting today, we will hold a meeting of the homelessness subcommittee next Thursday, January 21st. We held a blight subcommittee meeting last September and presented our blight policy and practice agenda as part of our new report, Revitalizing Pennsylvania, at last October's Homes Within Reach conference. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers today, Michelle Feldman and Doug Ryan. Michelle Feldman is the Policy Director of the Housing Alliance. Michelle brings to the Alliance a background in community development, media, and advocacy. She previously served as the Executive Director of Keep Philadelphia Beautiful and as the Commercial Corridor Manager and Communications Director of the Frankfurt Community Development Corporation. Prior to entering the world of housing and community development, she worked for 2 political consulting firms specializing in media. Doug Ryan is the Director of Affordable Homeownership for Prosperity Now. Prosperity Now believes that everyone, including people of color and people with limited incomes, deserve a chance to prosper. Its mission is to ensure everyone in our country has a clear path to financial stability, wealth, and prosperity. Prosperity Now offers a unique combination of scalable, practical programs, in-depth research, and proven policy solutions, all aimed at building wealth for those who need it most. Its programs focus on helping people build wealth, including homeownership, and enabling economic mobility. Doug Ryan has spent his entire career in the affordable housing field at the national and local levels, focusing on the development and financing of both rental and for-sale housing. I'll now turn the meeting over to Michelle Feldman.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks to everyone for joining the call today. Before I turn today's discussion over to Doug, I'm going to talk about the results to the survey we issued to our membership on homeownership, and then a couple of homeownership policies we're currently working on and wanted to bring to everyone's attention. First, as some background, at the very end of 2018, we issued a survey to our membership on fostering and strengthening homeownership in Pennsylvania. We wanted to hear about what was working and the gaps that exist here in PA. And the good news is we had a great response to that survey. We had representation from 46 of Pennsylvania's 67 counties and over 145 individual responses. In terms of the greatest unmet needs, the results indicated a resounding need for additional loans and grants for home repair, assistance with down payment costs, a lack of information about existing resources, and mortgage application denial due to strict credit standards. We also wanted to hear about what's working in local communities. educational classes and opportunities, as well as land banks to purchase properties, and first-time homebuyer programs rose to the top. We ended the survey by asking one of our favorite questions. If you had $1 million grant to support homeownership, what would you do with that opportunity? Based on some of the challenges we heard throughout the survey results, the answers here weren't surprising. Funding for construction unit development, home repair programs, down payment and closing cost assistance, and educational programming. We're excited to dive deeper into these survey results with the conversation that Doug's about to lead as we use those results in today's discussion to help inform the work that the Housing Alliance does moving forward. But before I turn the mic over to Doug, there are 2 policy ideas to highlight that we have done work on and will continue to do work on that we think address some of the challenges the survey results speak to. First, we're working to increase funding for FAIR, or the State's Housing Trust Fund. It's one of our top priorities. FAIR has been used successfully for homeownership purposes throughout Pennsylvania, and some good examples include financial counseling and literacy programs, homebuyer match programs, and funding for home repairs. The second policy idea that we wanted to highlight was just introduced in Harrisburg by Representative Brown from Monroe and Pike counties. This legislation, HB 128, would allow first-time homebuyers to deposit money into a savings account for the purpose of buying a first home, and the money can be deducted from their state income tax. Last session in Harrisburg, this legislation passed the House 189-1. And with that, before I turn the call over to Doug, I'm going to hand it back to Colleen for some instructions about unmuting yourself during this conversation portion.
Hi, thanks. As I mentioned, all lines are currently muted, but if you have any comments, you can certainly type them into the chat box in the bottom left-hand feature of your screen, or you can press *7 to unmute yourself, and after you have had your dialogue or comment, you can press *6 to remute yourself or mute your phone. So that's *7 to unmute your line and *6 to remute your line. Thank you.
All right, Doug, turning it over to you officially.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Thank you all for having me on your call this afternoon, and I look forward to this conversation that we have in the next hour or so. So again, thank you. I'm Doug Ryan. I'm with Prosperity Now. We're a DC-based nonprofit. Been around since 1979. We used to be known as CFED, and we work on asset and wealth building strategies for low and moderate income families with a particular emphasis on communities of color. And homeownership, of course, is a big component of wealth for the vast majority of Americans who have wealth, and we are interested in doing things to improve that, make more families homeowners, and give people the opportunity to become homeowners if that's what they want to do. And there's a whole bunch of challenges that you saw in your survey that I think reflect challenges across the country as well. So this is terrific. So I think we could get right in there and start going through the questions that are before you on the slide. And like any survey that you take, you want to know if it's relevant to what you're doing. So do the survey results reflect your experience of barriers to homeownership in your community? So with the results that we saw, there are a number of them that were raised, particularly concerns related to resources for home repair and things like that, information in those areas. So I'd like to get some feedback on what people are seeing out in Pennsylvania in this space. Do your experiences match what was found in the results of the survey? So 60% of people in the survey, 60% of respondents noted that there is a lack of resources for home repair. And I think that reflects a number of things, including the age of the housing stock, which is typical for the Northeast and the Midwest in the United States, and other things like that. So that's one thing I'd like to get people's opinion on.
Again, to unmute your line, it's *7.
Hello, this is Carol Catania from Delaware County.
Hi.
Hi, I just wanted to mention that in terms of resources for homeownership rehabilitation, one of the major issues that we're finding is the high cost of lead abatement that is required, and that causes a problem for us because we have properties that we cannot assist those homeowners because the costs exceed the caps that we have established in our program, because we just don't have enough funds to spend $60,000 on a unit, $30,000 being abatement and $30,000 being rehab. So the lead abatement is a big issue here in Delaware County.
That's really interesting. I imagine that's an issue for other parts of the state as well. Can I ask a real quick follow-up, if I may? Are the costs being driven in part because there are not enough certified contractors, or is it related just to the demand, or to what are the other factors involved?
I think it's really just that if we spend over a certain amount of money, we have to abate the entire property, and the cost just is excessive at that point. So we do have contractors. That's not the issue. It's just that the costs are high.
Interesting. That's really interesting and helpful. What else are people seeing out in their community, and how does the survey reflect that? Are there other issues that you would like to talk about related to home repair? The second highest issue, of course, was down payment assistance, with 56% of respondents. And that's across the country. We see that as a big challenge across the country. And then the third one was lack of information about resources. And I think those two are related, because a lot of people don't understand that you don't need 20% down for a mortgage. And I'm wondering what people are seeing in their communities related to those two issues. Okay, well, let's keep going then. There's some other areas that we want to cover, including, are there barriers to homeownership not mentioned in the survey results or yet on today's call, and we still have some time, obviously, to cover these things, that you see in your community?
Hello?
Yeah, hello.
Star 7.
Hi, this is Jehosha Wright of Allegheny County. I'm fairly new to this area. I've started doing some community outreach work with an organization in Pittsburgh. And I guess one of the things that I'm starting to notice as I continue to be in these like housing and development meetings is that we haven't exactly taken into account some of the economic barriers that may be unrelated to people homeowning and things like that, or renting and things. But I'm uncertain how a lot of these programs or research being done is taken into account disparities in the workforce.
That's a great question. So if I can follow up real quick with you on the line, are you raising up issues of, for example, low incomes or incomes not keeping up with the cost of housing and those kinds of things?
Right, yes.
Yeah, well, that's a real challenge. So that's a great question, and I think you have to couple that with a couple other things that are going on in housing markets in Pennsylvania and across the country, right? One is that we just aren't building enough housing stock. We aren't renovating and rehabilitating enough housing stock, and we're not offering enough variety of housing types, including rental, but in a homeownership space, condominiums, townhomes, row homes, or single-family detached that are smaller and other models. I think that's part of the challenge as well. And so there is research that suggests that having a more diverse housing stock can lower the cost of entry for new home buyers. So I think that's one thing, and that's an issue often that can be resolved at the local level because of land use restrictions and those kinds of things. But then we have also macro issues too. We have a shortage of construction workers, for example. and other issues that are complicating the housing market. But I do think the mismatch between incomes and housing costs is a real one, and it's only getting worse. And until we expand the housing stock options, I think we're in for a long road.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. What other things are people seeing out there?
So we had a write-in question from Teresa Duncan from Philadelphia, and she said a main barrier to homeownership is when a vacant home is purchased and divided, or housing for folks with special circumstances as the homeowners are not notified. Also, she had a question about the Make Safe certification.
Okay. Can you repeat the first one again? When people are dividing houses for special purposes in the community?
Yeah, when a home is purchased and then divided.
Okay, we're talking for like group homes and those kinds of uses?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a challenge because of typically fair housing rules often require do not require the notification of neighbors if it's a permitted use. So I do think that's something that has to be balanced, the needs of protected populations or protected classes with the rights of the community. So I do think that's an issue that has to be thought carefully about, and is understandably people have varying views about it. But I do think fundamentally that's at its core. But of course, we have an obligation, I think, as a society to meet the needs of those populations. And if it's developmental disabilities or mental health disabilities or substance abuse needs or an aging population, all these things are growing in such a way that we have to address these in a humane and efficient means. And I think that's the challenge that we're facing. I have to say I'm not familiar with the Make Safe program, but if somebody else wants to weigh in on that, I would appreciate that.
And we'll make a note of that to look into it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Are there others on the call that want to weigh in on other barriers to homeownership?
Yes, this is David Feldman down in Philadelphia. And one of the obstacles for especially first-time home buyers in low mid markets is the great number of homes in the last 10 years, single family, typically row homes, that have been purchased by investors for rental.
Yep.
We've gone from a 58% home ownership rate to a 52% home ownership rate. So when a home gets converted to an investor-owned rental, that tends to take it out of the market. The occupancy changes, but they just find another tenant. It doesn't become available in the market. So there's a shrinking pool of existing mid-market homes that are available for purchase.
You're absolutely right. That is a terrific thing to raise. And since the financial crisis, 10 plus years ago and in the following years, there have been a number of entrants to this investor market for single-family homes, and we're seeing that across the country, particularly in working class or middle-income communities that had been home ownership communities, and now they are, as you suggested, and as you noted in your area and that part of Philadelphia, that those are tipping towards becoming rental neighborhoods. And I think that should be a fundamental concern to us. At the core of this is that these have become very profitable to slightly rehab and turn into rentals. And I also think, again, without the resources that people need to become homeowners, people are seeing that as a reasonable alternative because they want to live in these communities because of the schools, because of the services, or what have you. And I think that's the challenge. Of course, it's well known that both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have made loans in this space to investors to purchase single-family rentals. So I think that's something that advocates should raise. And also, that's something I do know that is happening in Washington, certainly in the new Congress and the House of Representatives. There is some interest in that space as well. So I do think it's really important. So not only is it putting pressure on the homeownership market because you're taking stock out, but it's also putting pressure on the rental market because it seems to be driving prices up as well. So I think those are really good points, and I think we need to keep an eye on that. But there are some groups in D.C. that we're working with that are trying to address that, and so this is something that's on a lot of people's radar. Other thoughts?
We had another thought and question from Eileen from the Philly Fed. So the Philly Fed just released a report discussing how difficult it is for low to moderate income homeowners to access conventional home improvement loans. Are there other financing programs and options that you see low to moderate income homeowners using?
Yes, there are a couple, and I think that's a great question, and I think that's a fundamental challenge. And I also think that's a challenge kind of related to the earlier question, because when families don't have access to credit that can allow them to purchase and rehab a unit, other purchasers such as investors will step in, and because they do have the capital and the wherewithal to do that. So I think fundamentally we need to address that challenge, and particularly in older communities with aging stock, that this is a big issue. So a couple things on that. There are a couple federal programs, of course, that address this to some degree, and they frankly have to be improved. And with the government shutdown still ongoing in its 35th day, both FHA and rural development at USDA are hamstrung from processing those loans, but they both have programs. The 504 program is a loan program for low and moderate income adults and a grant program for seniors that can be used in rural areas of Pennsylvania to do home improvement. So that's something that people should consider. It's always oversubscribed at the end of the fiscal year, but it's important to know that that's out there if you're in rural eligible areas. And then the 203K program that HUD runs through the FHA is another repair program that is out there and available, but it is so difficult to use that is a challenge. We hear that quite a bit, that people, advocates and homeowners complain that this is not a realistic opportunity for them because it is so difficult to use. So I think that's the challenge. And I do think it's up to Congress to take a look at how they can streamline that, working with HUD. Frankly, HUD right now is a very difficult place to work with, but I do think there is some interest in Congress to take a look at that program, because in certain markets across the country, this could be a valuable resource. Other programs exist too. The AHP program with the Federal Home Loan Bank system has been helpful through nonprofits to do some home repair programs, and I think that should be looked at further if possible. There are other programs as well that might be of interest to families. Fannie and Freddie can also offer some help. Again, it's a diffuse menu of programs out there, and I do think advocates, including us, have to do a better job of making those resources known to homeowners and prospective homeowners. Are there other thoughts in this area? We should also, because the next question we wanted to talk about with the home loan and repair programs, how would they be, or which ones would be impactful for your community? So I would love to hear from people on this call. Have they used any of those programs, or are there other local and state initiatives that are being used and that are effective? That would be a great time to have this discussion. Any thoughts on the call about that? Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the home loan and repair program. So let's move to the next one, because I think this is a really compelling question about education topics for our communities to promote homeownership and promote homeownership resources. And then related, as I touched on earlier, the misconceptions about homeownership and the process. What are people seeing out in the world? So for example, what are people hearing about down payment challenges, for example? Any thoughts on that question?
This is David Feldman again. One quick thing I've noticed with my real estate hat versus, other phone ringing, versus a few years ago is sellers seem to be more reluctant to do seller assists, which used to be really common coming out of the housing crisis in the last year and a half or so. It's been harder to get sellers to, I think, do seller assists, but that could be anecdotal. I don't know if that's other people are finding that more widespread or not.
Why do you think that is?
Well, things are selling at close to asking price. So if you put a seller assist, that's reducing it. If you raise it too much, they worry about appraisals not hitting. So they'd rather have, a full price with no seller assist than bump it up 4% and have to rely on the appraisal coming in higher.
Right. Well, that's a good point. I mean, there are some markets, I think, that are cooling a little bit, and I still think we are seeing the impacts of the tax overhaul from 2017, impact the housing market because people are still trying to read how that's playing because of the mortgage interest deduction and also state and local taxes for those two deductions. So I think that's having an impact, and I think you're right. And I also think appraisers, to some degree, correctly, are being more conservative than they had been. But I understand that's also a challenge in certain markets too. I'd love to hear from other people on the call if they're experiencing that as well.
There was a question that came in from Derek Kendall Morris. In regards to home repair issue, I want to raise that we at Habitat for Humanity have been able to utilize Federal Home Loan Bank's AHP program successfully and PHFA's Help Loan program to assist homeowners in the Pittsburgh area.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and I'm not surprised. And I think the Federal Home Loan Bank system is underutilized or underknown in some ways, but also it's a very good program to rely on, and that is good to hear that that's happening out in Pittsburgh. Other folks have thoughts on this question? What kind of education is needed? Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Roberta Schwalm.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm with the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, PHFA, and I actually wanted to take a step back to the home improvement programs. One of the issues that I think would help Pennsylvania greatly is actually if we were to revisit our inspection system. Right now we make it a local government responsibility to have inspections done for permitting, and in many areas, while there is a system in place on paper, there is not functionally a system in place where homeowners can easily and timely get work that they are having done on their home inspected. I also think that same inspection issue is quite a problem for home buyers as well, that are, unless you voluntarily get a home inspection at the time of purchasing your house, there is no minimum standard that you can rely on.
Right.
There's no legal responsibility for your realtor to say, I've walked through thousands of houses, and whenever I see buckling like this on paneling in the basement, it means there's water behind these paneling boards, that kind of thing. So I would think we would help ourselves a lot if we had a more rigorous, vigorous method of ensuring standards for the housing that comes for sale and for the outcomes of renovation work that we do. A lot of organizations that have decided, well, we're going to make sure we have our own standards by having our own inspectors or even our own work crews, are then accepting a much greater limitation on their ability to work statewide, work larger regions, or even just the numbers that they can do in specific geographic areas.
Right.
And then another comment, I wanted to thank Habitat for the shout out for the HEALP program, the Homeowners Energy Efficiency Loan Program. It is available statewide and is both in Home Hub from the Housing Alliance and also at PHFA's website, phfa.org. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. On the inspection issue, I think I've heard that in other parts of the country as well. And I do think there's also on the home purchasing process, when someone's having an inspection, there's a misunderstanding, I think, among some first-time home buyers of what the intent or the purpose or what the rules are for the home inspectors. So I do think you make very good points on that. And having consistent standards would be helpful. The permitting question, though, I'd be curious from people on the call if that is an issue because of staffing capacity that localities don't have in order to do the permitting inspections or those kinds of things. Is it a resource question? What are the challenges there? Because I think fundamentally I would be surprised if localities would want to give up that authority or share that authority, but there must be ways to address that. I'd be curious what people are seeing.
Hi, this is Roberta again. Just to clarify what I was saying about local government permitting authority. Right now in Pennsylvania, a local government either has to staff required inspections for work with a staff person, or they have to outsource that to a company. Here in central Pennsylvania, Light and Heigl is an example of the type of engineering company that has gotten building inspectors, and they offer this service. It then is incumbent upon the homeowner to schedule those inspectors and ensure that they are able to get them in a timely fashion to the work before their contractor needs to move on, putting up drywall or whatever the next step is.
Right.
Certainly, more serious issues like electrical work, that kind of thing. I have not personally seen or heard a lot of issues with those inspections not occurring. I'm one person, of course, but when it comes to, roofs don't get inspected, drywalling and waterproofing in basements, which may or may not be inspected, it isn't getting inspected because it's the homeowner's responsibility, and neither the homeowner nor the contractor are stopping and insisting on doing those inspections.
Right.
And a lot of that, I think, is just capacity. We don't have the third-party organizations that all these municipalities in Pennsylvania could rely on to really have a rigorous outcome. So the homeowners are relying on the contractors, and the contractors are of all different stripes. There are wonderful ones, there are mediocre ones, there are poor ones, there are honest and helpful ones, and there are, of course, less so. And then there's also that issue of if you tell a contractor you want a roof, you'll hopefully get a roof, but you probably won't get insulation below the roof and in the rest of the house, which would really perhaps do what you were hoping would occur. Your house would be warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. And I find that a lot with the homeowners that I work with. They know they have one problem and they name that problem, but the truth is they're hoping for a lot better outcome than they're going to get from that one item. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. That does make a lot of sense. And I do think, that I think one way to approach that, and we see this a little bit, is having more robust home buyer education classes. And, because the emphasis has often been on credit building and resources for down payment and how to find a good program and those kinds of things. I think we also have to look and help people understand what it means to own a home and how the systems work and those kinds of things, because that's a game-changing experience when people purchase their first home and have to address those kinds of issues. So I do think that those are very good points. And fundamentally, sound rehabilitation work and, that's well done and all that kind of stuff adds to the asset and the value of the home, and that's in everyone's interest too. So I think those are all valid points and very good ones, so thank you. Does anybody else have an opinion on that piece or the education issues that we started to discuss and the home ownership process that you're seeing out there? Okay, so let's move to the next one. Let's talk about supply and housing stock issues. Is there a lack of supply in your community? That obviously has come up in the survey, and it's going to be different in different parts of Pennsylvania. But I'd also like to add the caveat about housing quality issues too. So what are people seeing in the housing supply space? Are there issues in particular markets that I would, or for example, in different parts of the state, are we seeing new construction taking off in certain markets, or is there a lack of housing stock simply because there's a lack of land, or are there zoning issues out there? I'd be curious to hear about that. Are people seeing different types of housing get built, either through different types of housing like townhomes and multifamily versus single-family detached? Are people raising concerns about zoning issues and those kinds of things? Are those things coming up in your community? Okay. Well, we'd love to hear more about that. If those issues come up, we'd love to hear more about what you're thinking and seeing on the housing stock issue. What about finding resources on homeownership in your community? How are prospective home buyers doing that, and who are they reaching out to? What are they looking at, and how are you sharing that kind of information?
So we did have a comment on the housing supply issue, again from
good.
Derek. I would say in Pittsburgh we do see a supply issue. Not enough affordable units are being built, and the vacant homes that could be renovated are often tied up due to tangled title or complex public property processes.
Yeah, that's interesting and not surprising. I would love to have Derek tell us what he thinks can be done about the second part of the question with the titling issue, because we do see that in older communities across the country. I'm wondering if there's anybody that's trying to address that.
This is Roberta Schwellem again. I just wanted to add the point that one of the things that we are looking at right now in our HEAL program is to make doing title work a loan eligible expenditure. We find that we have a fair number of homeowners who have inherited their home kind of by agreement with family members and don't follow up with making title changes. Sometimes they haven't even mentioned to their, they just assume paying a family member's mortgage and don't even actually have an official assumption in place. So that is something that I'm hoping we will be able to make a change to, because we find the same issue, that either clouded title or potentially clouded title is a problem, and the homeowners can't afford and can't afford typically, or don't have any idea what it will cost them. It may not even be all that expensive, but they don't even want to have to deal with this.
I would imagine if faced with that, somebody's going to walk away from that property and consider something else, because that is a daunting prospect, and a great unknown, I would think. Absolutely. Do other people have opinions on the housing supply issue or resources? Because I think the title issue is related to both of those questions. I mean, we have to get stock productive again, to make it available for families to purchase, and also it's good for the tax base too. What else are people seeing in those two areas? Okay, let's keep moving a little bit further. What resources are working in your community, and what do people have examples of what's been really effective over the last few years? Things that they can share, best practices, that kind of stuff. It's rarely necessary to reinvent the wheel or make things out of whole cloth in this space, because there's a lot of good ideas out there that are working. What are people seeing?
So back to the title issues, we heard again
Okay.
from Derek that he's going to be using conservatorship to expedite some titles.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So that must be that's good to see. I mean, and has that been effective?
Sounds like they're just beginning to do
Okay.
that. And in Pittsburgh, there have been some programs to provide free legal services to get clear title, and also
Right.
free or low-cost estate planning for low-income neighborhoods.
That's really important. I think it would be interesting to see, at some time later how effective that's been and what are the results, because that could be really helpful as a lesson for other communities across the country, because we are hearing about that in lots of different places. And that's, of course, something that can be exploited by, less than honest participants in the housing market, too. So that's something to keep an eye on.
And our Deputy Director, Lavana, wanted to mention something as well. I believe she's unmuted.
Sure. So this is Lavana. I just wanted to remind everyone, in case you forgot or if you didn't know, but in the last legislative session, we finally, after years of advocacy, passed the Clear Title Law, which basically allows for family members and other apparent heirs to inherit property more quickly if there was some sort of obvious agreement, like they took over payments, or, for example, if a landlord was allowing a tenant to have an informal kind of rent-to-own situation, and there's some evidence of that. It used to be 25 years was how long you would have to wait to gain title, and the legislation shortened that to 10 years. So that is something that's available to people if you have that in your community. And obviously there are some legal steps that people would have to take, but it is much easier than it used to be in Pennsylvania. So I wanted to remind everyone of that. And then I secondly wanted to say, as part of our blight agenda, it is a big priority to help properties with unclear title for a variety of reasons, not just in the inheritance type of situation, to become clear more quickly in order to either be acquired by land banks and be put back into productive use, to help release them from LLCs that are not taking care of them. So that is something we're prioritizing and trying to figure out legislative solutions to on the blight side, but obviously also affect home ownership.
Great, thank you. That's interesting. Do people have thoughts on that? So that was the last legislative session. That would be interesting to see if people start taking advantage of that. What else are people seeing that's working in their communities related to home ownership more broadly, or on some of the specific issues that we raised today? Okay. Are there other things that people want to discuss that were part of the survey or related to the challenges of home ownership in your communities in Pennsylvania? I'd love to hear more about that as well. What's working, what's not working, things you're trying to launch, those kinds of areas? Okay, if not, I think this part of the conversation is done, and I appreciate everybody's input and interest in listening to this and having me participate in your policy call. I really do appreciate that. Look forward to working with you in the future if possible, and going from there. So, Michelle, should I hand it off to you?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Thanks so much. And then to end today's call, I wanted to turn it back over to Peter.
Hi, and Doug, I'd echo Michelle's thanks. You've done a great job of moderating this and discussing this with our housing colleagues. We really appreciate it. As Michelle mentioned at the beginning of today's call, the main purposes have been to share the results of our homeownership survey and, more importantly, for you to share your ideas about how we can bring homeownership within the reach of more Pennsylvanians. We're going to reuse the results of the survey and the discussion we've had today to inform our legislative agenda for 2019, which we will present in a legislative briefing in March or April. We also plan to present at least one webinar on homeownership later this year. We're very grateful to you for your contributions to this effort and for the work you do every day to bring homeownership within reach for your neighbors throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. We are going to be sending out a recording and the slides of the webinar early next week.
Thanks so much again to everyone for joining us. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is if there were thoughts or questions that didn't get addressed today, my contact information is on the last slide. So we would love to hear from you.
Thank you again, everybody, very much.
Thank you, everybody. Absolutely.
Have a good weekend, everyone.